materials belonging to passengers. The RAF form a board of inquiry to investigate why an apparently routine flight has ended in the service's worst peacetime tragedy. Tony Cable was lead investigator for the Air Accident Investigation Board, the civil body tasked with the initial crash investigation. Zulu Delta 576, like the rest of the RAF Chinook fleet, isn't fitted with a black box recorder. So Cable has no way of knowing what was going on in the cockpit in the moments before the crash.
There were no survivors, sadly, who could give an account of what happened. There were some ear witnesses, but there were no eyewitnesses who actually saw it crash. There was no radar recording, and there was no recording of radio messages close to the time of the accident. So there was very little evidence to go on, apart from what came out of the crash site and the wreckage examination.
Now, by rewinding the events of the day and going deep into the investigation, we can re-examine the tragedy to uncover what could have led to this accident. Within 24 hours, Tony Cable is walking the site of the crash, trying to understand the helicopter's last movements. Burning wreckage is strewn across an area of nearly 2 square kilometers.
I estimated in this case that something like 80% of the aircraft had been affected by ground fire, and in the order of 20% of it had been destroyed.
Cable's experienced eye spots the first significant clue.
There was some very faint marks at the initial impact point, which you could match to the forward landing gear on the Chinook.
The helicopter had first struck the hill on a rocky outcrop of the Mull at a height of 810 feet.
It had suffered a glancing blow on an outcrop of rock, not doing a great deal of damage, and had then progressed airborne for almost 200 meters before the main part of the aircraft had a heavy impact further up the hill and broke into 2 or 3 parts.
The absence of scarring from the rotor blades around the impact point gives Cable an understanding of the position of the Chinook at the time.
The flight path angle was in the order of 20 degrees above the horizontal, so a climbing flight path. The aircraft attitude was nose up, round about 30 degrees, and the aircraft banked in the order of 5 to 10 degrees to the left.
These details give a snapshot of the Chinook's last moment, but they offer no explanation as to why it crashed.
With so many high-ranking anti-terrorist personnel on board, sabotage must be a consideration for crash investigators.
In the immediate aftermath of the crash, suspicions fall on IRA involvement. 2 months previously, an RAF Lynx helicopter was shot down over Northern Ireland.
The single mortar, equivalent to a 250-pound bomb, travelled 150 yards over residents' rooftops. The Lynx, like this one, was hit in the tail at 100 feet as it came into land.
We had a good look back well before the impact point. By foot and low level in a helicopter, just studying the area back to the coast along the projected flight path.
If he can find any part of the chopper separated from the bulk of the wreckage, it could indicate an in-flight explosion.
But we'd found no signs of any further wreckage, anything having detached from the aircraft before it had made its initial impact.
A terrorist act is quickly ruled out. It leaves Cable with only two possibilities: mechanical failure or pilot error. Cable examines the actuators, part of the hydraulic system that allows the pilot to control the two separate sets of rotors on the Chinook. The position of the actuators gives an indication as to what the Chinook was doing in its final seconds.
It turned out that they were, in fact, indicating different airspeeds, which suggested either there was a fault somewhere, or the maneuver was being undertaken.
The RAF asks the Chinook's manufacturer, Boeing, to run a computer simulation based on Cable's findings. The simulation determines that the aircraft was traveling at approximately 150 knots, with a rate of climb of 1,000 feet per minute. A fast ground speed, but a slow rate of climb. A few seconds before impact, it made a sharp pull-up, a flare in helicopter parlance. It's the helicopter equivalent of an emergency stop, suggesting that the crew only saw the hillside at the last moment.
My lords, I have followed closely the various inquiries which have taken place to establish the cause of this tragic accident, and
Lord Glenarthur, a former Army helicopter pilot, took a particular interest in the crash.
The positions of the controls were in exactly the position you'd expect them to find after a last-minute attempt to avoid contact with the ground. You suddenly see ground. Sugar, you pull back on the stick, you probably pull up on the lever and you probably put a boot of the rudder in to initiate the turn away. It was an instinctive reaction at a moment of very, very high drama, which they had not been expecting. Is how I would describe it.
The board concludes that this evasive action means the pilots were in control of the aircraft a few seconds before. Cable hopes the Chinook's navigational computer, recovered intact at the crash site, might reveal more. But, deemed classified equipment by the RAF, it's sent to the manufacturer for analysis. The device reveals that approximately 18 seconds before the crash, the Chinook's altitude is between 400 and 500 feet. Cable is also told that at 1.5 kilometers from the lighthouse on the Mall, the Chinook's first waypoint, a crew member manually requested their next heading, a waypoint change. The computer indicated that a left turn on a bearing of between 10 and 15 degrees was required to hit their next waypoint, the village of Corran in the Scottish Highlands. To the RAF, the waypoint change is evidence that the pilots were in control of the aircraft for the whole flight, and that they subsequently decided against making the turn. While Cable continues analyzing the wreckage for clues, the RAF Board of Inquiry concentrates on the actions of the pilots.
They planned to fly under what are known as visual flight rules.
by flying VFR.
Visual they should remain at all times 1,000 meters clear of cloud.
But the RAF Board of Inquiry believes the crew should have been flying under instruments rules. Based on the weather forecast and the reports of witnesses on the Mull, the board believes as the Chinook approaches the peninsula, clear skies give way to some low mist and fog.
It's like going down the motorway and, you know, running into fog. You are immediately putting yourself in extreme danger.
The board decides that by the time of their last recorded altitude of 400 to 500 feet, the crew are in cloud. To comply with navigation rules, the pilots need to slow to a hover and climb to a safe altitude, in this case, 2,800 feet. The aircraft crashed at just over 800 feet.
They were 2,000 feet below the height that they should have been if they were in instrument meteorological conditions, which is what they were.
The RAF Board of Inquiry concludes that the crew decided to ignore the waypoint change and fly over the Mull instead, but chose the wrong rate of climb to clear the hillside. In the absence of any concrete proof of mechanical failure, the RAF now come up with their version of what happened to Zulu Delta 576.
Scottish Military, good afternoon. This is Foxtrot 4, Juliet 40.
4 minutes to disaster. Jonathan Tapper contacts Scottish Military Air Traffic Control. 23 seconds to disaster. With the lighthouse 1.5 kilometers away, a crew member requests a bearing for the next waypoint on their flight path. Instead of turning left to head along the coast as planned, they continue onwards into thick fog, intending to fly over the Mull. They should now slow right down and turn away from the high ground, or switch to instrument navigation and climb at the maximum rate to a safe height. But they do neither. Traveling at high speed towards the rocky hillside, they begin a gentle climb. Approximately 4 seconds to disaster, the Mull appears out of the fog. The pilot attempts evasive action. The helicopter's nose comes up and it begins to roll to the left. But it's going too fast to avoid the hillside.
When you look at all the facts, you have to be bold enough and brave enough to say, I'm sorry, I can find no other reason. This is going to be unpleasant for me to have to announce, but nevertheless, they had breached their duty of care and that therefore they were, I'm afraid, grossly negligent.
For the RAF hierarchy, the case is closed.
Bound together in our grief, as 12 months ago, we reflect on what happened on this spot.
But the pilots' families and supporters refuse to accept the conclusions of the board's reviewing officers. At the time of the crash, Squadron Leader Robert Burke was the unit test pilot at RAF Odium, the unofficial headquarters of the Chinook fleet. Burke knew both Tapper and Cook. He believes the RAF's assertion that such experienced pilots would have willingly pressed on in bad weather and towards high ground is wrong.
To climb straight ahead into high ground is the last thing any experienced pilot's going to do. It's crazy. Yes, they both went crazy at the time. They're not